Two countries who each have such charismatic, dynamic, highly intellectual, and charming leaders. Also, each be too strong-willed to know when enough is quite enough, and by now, perhaps even too late. What I am going to be talking about will be the missing children of Ukraine. And on that note, how can two countries with such a very long history of intertwined culture and society, it's tragic that there's actually no easy way to turn back and trace the forgotten path to the original friendship. Very sensitive and also confusing, and come out with such tragic consequences. If you can imagine a married couple with a family who is amidst a divorce, begin to use their children as weapons, and although it's not a healthy thing for families to do and resort to, it happens altogether too often. And if you can imagine that kind of scenario, I think you can imagine what the children of Ukraine have been going through. welcome to my channel. Hi everyone, and welcome to an episode of Missing Kids. Today I am not talking about one case, but thousands. Connected to the long-standing and still ongoing Ukrainian-Russian war. They are all connected by one single and very tragic condition. Before we get into it though, I do need to pick up one ingredient for a very special Easter bread that I am dying to try out. It's a traditional family kind of a cheese bread that my mother, my late mother, and all of my late aunts used to make every Easter. And so I'm gonna actually get going to the store and pick up this ingredient so then we can get home and prepare the bread. It has to rise for 2 hours. So I'm going to get back to you about the missing kids in a little while. So I just got home and these are the ingredients that I am going to be using. I just neglected to film the 1 teaspoon of sugar. That's the only other additional ingredient. And so let me just run it by you. I'll do the recipe here, and I'm not sure if I'm going to be adding it at the end or in the description, whatever. But it's 2.5 cups of white flour, all-purpose, and 1/4 cup of butter. You can do it without butter, but I prefer to use the traditional ingredients and see how that will turn out. And some white and dark pepper and salt. I have here white pepper as well. And I'm going to use a little of both because I like my food to be a little on the spicy and hot side. So we'll see how that turns out. And instant yeast. And I have nutritional yeast. And I chose nutritional yeast because it's on the cheesy side, just like this recipe. So I'm wondering how it's going to actually turn out. And 1/4 cup of butter, but softened and not liquefied, not solid, but right in between. It's not much butter, so, you know. And 4 room temperature eggs. Actually 4 egg yolks, and you can leave out a few drops of the white and use it for a glaze at the end when you're ready to put the bread into the oven to bake. And of course, cheese, lots of cheese. And the traditional way is about 1.5 cups to something like 2 cups of Parmigiano Reggiano or Parmigiano. And these other recipes are calling for a mixture of Pecorino and Parmigiano, and also something like Swiss, or I don't know what other, something like Asiago. And so it could be a solid cheese, and you can grate it or you can melt it. I'm just going to actually be using a combination of all 3 cheeses grated. And so I'm going to be putting about 2 cups of grated cheese into the Easter bread. Now the yeast is going to be mixed with 1/4 cup of milk, and it's going to be warm. So just thought I would let you know how I'm going to be preparing the yeast. And it's very important to let the dough rise for 2 hours or more. And so I'm going to have lots of time in between to talk to you about other things. Also going into the mixture that is going to be mixed with a mixer, it's going to be 1/4 cup of lukewarm water. And I don't know if I forgot that while I was talking to you before. I think I forgot to mention that. That's kind of important. And so I'm going to be using 1 1/4 teaspoons of the instant yeast mix with 1/4 cup of milk. And so, yeah, that's important. I tend to botch up the yeast all the time, but yeah, that's pretty important, because if you put a little more or a little less, it's not going to rise properly, and the texture of the bread is not going to be correct. And so it's going to be off. It's going to taste great, but it's going to, you know, the texture will be quite off. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed and hoping that I don't make a mistake. Well, all the ingredients are in, and they should mix for 10 minutes. And meanwhile, I've preheated the oven to 425, and it will bake at that temperature after it rises for 2 hours for 15-20 minutes. And then it should drop. I should drop the temperature to 350, but I know that this oven doesn't cook anything at 350, so I'm going to drop it to 375 for about 30 to 40 minutes, and that'll be it. Of Ukraine has been working quite arduously to have all the missing children of Ukraine returned. And so what is implicit in this sort of scenario is that all the children who have become missing in Ukraine, they have been taken by Russians. Ukrainian person who has been working around the clock to have all of these children found and recovered and brought back home, this person says that there can be no peace between Russia and the Ukraine until all those missing children have been brought home. Besides this person, people from 23 different countries that form the Europol in The Hague have also joined forces to accomplish this very mission. These 23 different countries have all been trying to use facial recognition online to see if they can locate the missing children who have been probably taken under circumstances that have been made out to be quite humane, but in reality, I think it got carried away, and it has to stop. Back to the original cases, which we don't have. There are files of these original missing child cases, but we actually don't have access to them. They're not public, actually. They are public in certain websites, but we don't have access to that. And so what these experts are doing, these experts and investigators, is that they are going back to the original location of where these children were snatched, and some of them under very violent conditions, other children under more humanistic terms, and I'll get into that in a second. But they're going back to analyze CCTV and photos that were captured around the time of the children's abduction. Data analysis was able to determine whether or not multiple children were taken from that same location. So they are backtracking, they are moving backwards, and it is the only logical way, assuming that they can't get to Russia, it's the only logical and organized way that they can fall back on to try to locate these missing children and their present whereabouts. Now, 8 children were tracked down using open source intelligence, and but the detectives that are working on these cases are not going to disclose the identity of these 8 children who were found and returned. The reason for that is because it would put their safety at high risk. Just how many children have gone missing? The government does indeed estimate that at least 19,500 Ukrainian children have been deported or forcibly abducted from their families and homes to Russia and Russian-occupied territories in the Ukraine since the full-scale invasion began in 2022. And of those 19,500, only 388 have been, thankfully, returned home. Sadly, gathered evidence indicates that children who were abducted from the parents were not allowed to go home or even call other known relatives. So many different sides to the story, and one worker actually claims that they were in fact working to rescue children. From what I don't know. I know that there are many dangerous war zones in the Ukraine, and so that could be used to sort of build up the case for Russia. The one main argument that seems to be pretty consistent is, in fact, it's been proven that it's false, that the children were free to return home. And I'm thinking that maybe there was a time limit, and the time limit was not respected in many cases, and the children became permanently missing. So it's a very confusing and very delicate situation, and a situation that does not have a very easy solution. And still, other children were brought to other different orphanages, and that is to be re-educated. And so these certain orphanages were treated as camps. The killing of Ukrainian culture by disallowing the children to speak in their native Ukrainian tongue. Isn't that nice? And so what I would define them as is practically almost as a war camp, a prison camp, and a horrible example, or actually a very good example, of horrible child abuse. That is how deep the hatred runs between these two countries that were once so lovingly involved in friendship. And so it's very hard for me to imagine how quickly this might have deteriorated. Russia does continue to define these orphanages as summer camps. Summer camps are supposed to be happy and carefree and temporary and not cause permanent and severe emotional trauma. If it were a temporary thing for their own safety, a matter of weeks or months, I could probably go along with that. But because it's so long, because it is so abusive and continual, I just don't think that I can go along with that argument. One of the most insane ways to undermine the power of the child and their past with their real families is to simply claim that their families no longer want them, that they tried to get rid of them, and that there is no other place for them to go but to stay in Russia and begin a new life there with people that they don't know and people that perhaps probably would never love them. UN defines such massive deportation as genocide. Clear to me that the main goal of such Russian workers who were involved in these mass deportations, and the main goal was to completely transform these children and turn them into, first and foremost, Russians. Deny their roots and their families. Children of Ukraine, and so many more are still missing. I hope that this really gets resolved. And this is a very sad and tragic case, a case that right now doesn't seem to have much of an end, or much of a hope for an end anytime soon. And I'm hoping that I'm wrong. and I am going to let you have a look as soon as it's done. And so stick around for a little longer. Okay guys, so everything is done, and I hope that you have enjoyed listening and watching to my story on the missing children of Ukraine, and my very special Easter bread recipe. I hope that you come back and join me again for my next episode, and I will be seeing you very soon.